Yeah, I'm Siobhan Curham, and I am a failure. Hands up, anyone here who's never failed at anything ever in their life? I was going to say, you must be a late developer then, because I think failure is just part and parcel of life, isn't it? I think, and the fact that no one put their hands up is why I feel so passionately about writing and speaking about failure, because it's something that happens to all of us, and yet we're taught to feel ashamed of failure, scared of failure, never talk about failure, and especially I think now in the age of social media, when we're all kind of putting, or most of us I think put a quite edited sort of highlights reel on Instagram or Twitter or whatever about all the good things happening to us, and it's very rare that you see someone go on Instagram with a picture of their latest failure. Actually, the other day I came home the other night, and my son and his girlfriend were in the kitchen, and every single pot and pan was out on the counters, and I said, "Oh Mum, we decided to make, is it kulfi? Indian ice cream, basically, mango Indian ice cream. We don't have a blender, so my son was trying to blend mangoes with a fork." And so, yeah, you can tell it was a definite failure, and I posted a picture of it on Facebook just as a kind of antidote to all the perfect food posts, and everyone loved it. So, yeah, exactly. We need to be more honest about failure. So I'm going to be very honest about a couple of failures of mine. I'm very quick about a couple of failures of mine. So the first one, when I was a kid, I loved to read books, and from that love of reading sort of spawned a love of writing, and I dreamed of one day being a published author. So at 18, I went off to university to study English and screenwriting. But when I got there, although I made a lot of friends and I was having a lot of fun at uni, the negative side, I went to uni back in the day when only about 10% of people went to university, and that 10% tended to come from very wealthy, well-to-do backgrounds. And I grew up on a council estate in London. I came from a very poor background. And so when I got to uni, this inner voice that we've kind of heard about a lot tonight in other talks, started kicking in, sort of saying, you don't belong here, you're not good enough to be a writer, you don't come from the right background, people from your background shouldn't be writers or shouldn't even be at uni, you should be working in a shop. No. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of negative voice that just plays on a loop. So unfortunately, after 2 years at uni, I listened to this voice and I dropped out, and I went to work for the complaints department for a well-known frozen food company that rhymes with Niceland. And if you've ever shopped at Niceland, you can imagine the complaints department was pretty busy. And I did get to write as part of my job, but all I got to write were grovelling apology letters that said things like, "Dear sir, I'm so sorry you found a severed finger in your frozen..." No, not really. Any lawyers for Iceland? That didn't happen, but you get the drift. It was just grovelling apology letters, so I wasn't exactly living the dream. However, after a couple of years, I was working a different job, a job that I equally hated and was equally bad at in sales, and I unexpectedly fell pregnant. And when I say not sort of Mary and Joseph style unexpected, I was in a relationship, but it wasn't planned. And so when the shock wore off, and then the excitement came, and I was going to be a mum, and then as I started my maternity leave, I had this sudden light bulb moment. Well, I'm going to be off work for a while. Why not use this as an opportunity to do some writing? Because of course my passion for writing hadn't gone. I mean, if you have a passion for anything, it doesn't just disappear. However afraid you are or negative you are about it, it's still there. So that's what I did. I sort of set myself the target of trying to get something, a career established as a writer before my son would have to start nursery and I'd have to go back to work. And in a nutshell, that's what happened. There were a lot of rejections along the way, a lot of little failures along the way, but I got some articles published, I got some short stories published, and then I got my first book deal. And I'm speeding through this, but basically I had 4 books published for adults. So the first one was a non-fiction book, and then I had 3 novels for adults published. And so I thought, that's it, I've kind of, I failed at uni, but I've managed to achieve my dream, and now I'm a success. But life isn't like that, is it? It's not like you have a couple of failures when you're young, you learn from it, and then it's plain sailing forevermore. Failure is part of life for all of our life. And so what happened with me was my third novel, my fourth book came out, and it was really disappointing sales. So I was dropped by my publisher, which is really the literary equivalent of being dumped. Only when you get dropped by your publisher, there's no, oh, it's not you, it's me bullshit. It's all you, and your poor, lousy book sales. So I came home that night from the meeting where it was my publisher, where I found out I'd been dropped. And that was really one of the lowest points of my life, because a few months previously, my marriage had broken up I don't think there's ever a good way for a marriage to break up, but this was particularly bad. And so my marriage had failed, and now here I was, a single mum, and also a failure as a writer. And I remember getting home and thinking, make a chocolate cake, because that is my sort of go-to emergency answer for everything. Bake a cake. So I made this cake. I mean, it's fucking insane, but I made a cake, slung it in the oven, and then I just sank to the kitchen floor and cried because I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd lost my sole source of income. I had a young son to support, and also more than that, I felt a failure as a person, because so much of my identity was tied up in being a writer back then. So I was sitting on the floor crying, and then to make matters even worse, I forgot there was a cake in the oven, so the cake burnt. So it was a real low point. But the one, there's lots of good things about being a single parent, but one of them is that you don't have the luxury to sort of wallow in self-pity. You have to earn some money. So I, obviously I cried and I was depressed and sad for a while, but then I picked myself up and I thought, right, I've got to earn some money. And at the end of the day, I have had 4 books published, with big publishing houses. That's got to count for something. Maybe, thank you. Thank you. So maybe that counts for something. And so I basically constructed this. Thank you. Oh, I love you in that corner. Thank you. So I just cobbled together, basically, a career. I started working as a freelance editor. I started working as a writing coach, helping other writers with their books. I started running 2 weekly writing groups for adults in London, where I was living at the time. And I started going into high schools and working with teenagers and teaching them about creative writing. And they would say to me, oh, what books have you written, miss? Can we read them? I thought, well, not really, because they're for adults. And then also working with teenagers reminded me of what a tough time the teenage years can be, and how much books had helped me through those years myself personally. So another light bulb went off, and I thought, well, I could write a book for teens. But I just thought, well, you've been dumped by a publisher, you're never going to get published again, you're sort of soiled goods, if you like, in the literary world. So I thought, well, F it, I'm just going to self-publish a book. I'm going to write about issues that affect teens, in the hope that if they read the novel, it will help them. And so that was my sole motivation, sort of to help kids. And so I thought, I'm going to self-publish, and that way I can give the ebook away for free, because it won't cost me anything to produce. And I also produced a physical book, which people could buy as well. And then teens started reading it, people started reviewing it, it was getting good reviews, which really bolstered my confidence. And then one day I was flicking through a magazine about the publishing world, and I saw this article about asking publishers to submit their books for a National Book Award. And so on a whim, I thought, sod it, I'm just going to enter it, even though it's self-published. And somehow it got accepted into the award. And somehow it got long-listed, and all the other writers were from big publishing houses and very well-known sort of names. Then it got shortlisted, and then I was invited to this sort of swanky award event up in London, and I just went on my own, because I thought, there's no way I'm going to win this thing, but I'll go and have it would be great to be part of it. And I won, my book won. Yeah. So, the moral of the story is that what was to become my biggest success, because once it won, and it was a bit of a news story because it was a self-published book, and so then everyone wanted to know me. Then my email inbox was full of emails from agents and publishers, and it went to auction. And since then, like Sally said, I've now had 24 books published, and it's just proof, really, that what directly came from my biggest failure, my biggest success. And so, sorry, this is so rushed, but this is the bit I really want to share with you, because I have, when I looked back on it, I realised, there was a process I went through there, And handily, I realised it's 4 stages, and every stage begins with M. So I've called it the 4 M's, so hopefully that'll make it easier for you to remember. But so the first thing you have to do when you fail at anything, whether it's work or in your personal life, is mourn the failure. You have to grieve the loss, allow yourself to feel negative, because of course if you press those feelings down, they're just going to come back to haunt you later, and probably in a much worse way. So like me, sit on the kitchen floor, cry, burn a cake, get drunk, whatever, but properly acknowledge that something bad has happened, and feel sad about it. But then the second stage, and the important thing, is not to stay too long in the mourning, because then it tips into self-pity, and then it can get worse and worse, and it's harder to get out of. So the second stage is to meditate on the failure, and by that I don't mean kind of like a yogi sort of I mean, do meditate. I find meditation really helpful, but I mean meditate on the lessons, because there are always lessons in failure. So think about a failure you've been through yourself, and just ask, well, what did I learn from it? And it's such a good way of turning a failure around, when you start to see the wisdom, the lessons, the way you can use the experience to positive effect. So for me, when I meditated on my failure, I realised, actually, you know what? I don't need a publisher to be a writer. I also learned that actually, if you use, when I changed my motivation for writing to helping others, to helping kids, it was so freeing, because I didn't have to worry anymore about keeping a publisher happy or book sales or any of that stuff. And I found that really, really freeing. So that was another important lesson. And then when you've kind of meditated on the lessons of your failure, the third M is to get motivated. So that's when, like I said, for me it would have been, just really thinking about, who's this book going to help? How can it help? And really going for it. And to this day, that's still my motivation, my sole motivation with my writing. I honestly don't give a shit about book sales and things like that anymore, because I've seen how the publishing world works. I'm quite cynical about the publishing world, but in a healthy way, I think, because I know a lot of writers, and I see them getting so kind of eaten up by, how many books am I going to sell? I think when you make your motivation helping people, it kind of removes all of that stuff, and you're free to just enjoy what you're doing. So yeah, get motivated. And final M is moving on. So that's where you sort of pivot away from failure and facing, sort of hopefully future success. And so that's where you start planning, you start actually setting goals. And for me, it was right, I'm going to write and self-publish this book. So I hope that helps. So remember the 4 M's. There's a ton of stuff on my unspellable website, siobhancurham.com. But yeah, you'll find me on the Facebook thing, and do link up. I love linking up online with people on Facebook, Instagram, all of the stuff. So, and thank you so much for letting me speak tonight. It's been brilliant night.